one of our biggest challenges is visibility over real-time data.
Which means every company, well, most companies, are looking to kind of couple finance with sales a lot earlier in the transaction life cycle during the customer engagement, right?
You're going to want to configure your offering in a more customized way to win business.
One of the complications, or a couple of the complications we've worked together on are, in terms of, how do you price based on a percentage, right? As simple as that, versus on absolute price.
And that is going to look very differently to the organization that's well established and mature, that has 50,000 employees.
First off, welcome to our first episode. This is, obviously been long overdue. We've been talking about it for a while.
Absolutely.
And, we're really happy to have you as a guest on our podcast, which, has to do with revenue precognition, as we've been discussing.
Thank you for having me. It has been, it's been long in the making. We have been talking about it for a while, and it's finally here. Excellent. Super excited.
For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, I should say, we are focused on solving the sales and finance gap solution, right?
That old chestnut, that problem.
That old chestnut, right? And I say solving the sales and finance gap solution, kind of put the cart before the horse there. It's the challenges associated with not having finance and sales, connected, which is what creates a host of issues, which is the crux of what we're here to discuss. But we've kind of put a spin to it. We're calling it revenue precog, in terms of saying, look, a lot of things need to happen upstream from a sales transaction point of view for the revenue to be recognized downstream in finance, right? And it's not just rev rec, right? It's billing, it's invoicing. There's a cash flow element to things also. But definitely, how we stack up the revenue schedule for different business models and different, transactions essentially pertaining to those business models, and how some of that value can be unlocked upfront and, obviously reduce a lot of stress downstream for the finance organization, right? Right, perfect. So with that, I just like kind of let's formally introduce you, Dai, because obviously our viewers haven't, had the benefit of working with you. Some have, I'm guessing, but not all of them. So, Dai Harris, heads up RevOps at a currency-focused fintech organization owned by a multinational payment card services corporation, right? So, what we're focusing on obviously is recurring and variable revenue. That's a big part of, what Dai obviously drives at this said fintech. And, obviously this is a hot area, right? Where you are selling a currency service to a customer, Dai, but you need to provide the level of flexibility, the level of viability when you're kind of selling the products or solutions when you transact with customers. But at the same time, your job, from what I understand, is to make sure that finance is able to take those transactions, make sense of them, obviously bill them, and then recognize revenue on the back of everything that sales is doing on one side of the organization, which needs to get reflected for various reasons, not just because you're a high growth fintech owned by this multinational, but also because that's a way for you to measure kind of efficiency and productivity and continue to grow the solution set that really differentiates you in the market, right?
Absolutely.
So give us a little bit about your role and some of the challenges you face, and then we can kind of deep dive into some of those areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in role for about 3.5 years now, and I came from a risk-based organization to a financial institution, two very different models. So historically, I've worked for organizations, much more simpler organizations, where the model is far simpler, and the connection between sales and finance is integrated, and making those predictions, those forecasts, have historically for me been less of a challenge than in my current position. But as you can imagine, working for a multinational organization in the finance space, how we forecast revenue and how we adapt to market changes and geopolitical changes is quite challenging. And there are two ways that I look at forecasting. There's the hard data, which is predominantly what we're going to talk about today when we start to think about revenue streams and pricing models and pricing configuration. And then there's also that soft element as well, where geopolitical issues are more prevalent by exploring forecasting from a non-data perspective. What do I mean by that? I mean engaging with our clients and understanding our clients and taking that insight from those conversations and the underlying activities that are associated with that, and feeding that into our forecasting model. But coming back to the sort of the hard science behind revenue forecasting, I see a lot of our organizations, and I've worked for a lot of organizations in the past, that simply don't get it right. Don't get it right. We're in the 21st century. It's 2024. We have a plethora of data available to us as standard almost, and now we're moving into the realms of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's important that we get that piece right, that data piece, where we can take the hard facts and feed that into the model. We need to be getting that right, and we need to be thinking about it earlier in that life cycle, which is predominantly what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely, and I think that sets the stage, kind of beautifully for what we're here to discuss. But let's drill down into some of the points that you made. We won't talk too much about AI because I think I know your take on that, and that's a whole separate, I think, podcast
Absolutely.
by itself. I think. But just kind of rewinding back a little bit from what you said about, you see these gaps all the time, right? You see organizations, as you said, to quote you, not getting it right all the time from a sales finance, handoff point of view. What would you say some of the top challenges are, right? Is it lack of sales discipline in terms of how products get sold? Is it further upstream in terms of how you are, kind of designing these products and the product catalog itself in terms of pricing and billing models? Is it the lack of kind of collaboration or handoff between when an order gets created and when finance knows when and how to pick it up in context of a sales transaction? So it's a lack of context downstream. These are some of the things that come up. Revenue allocation, right? In terms of IFRS 15 and some of the accounting standards that you obviously have to adhere to, ASC 606. In terms of saying, look, a revenue for contracts, how do you allocate revenue for different products? Obviously, it's a recurring revenue stream. That's a revenue schedule with the deferred revenue waterfall. If it's variable, that's recognized very differently. What are some of those areas, those pressure points, if you will, in terms of where you see organizations, to quote you, not getting it right?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's probably a lack of visibility over the data early enough in the life cycle. So organizations like the one that I currently work for, and like organizations that I've worked for in the past, are very good at the pre-close. So I see a lot of organizations put a lot of emphasis on CRM systems, capturing data, managing that pipeline, moving that data through the pipeline. And then the deal closes and everybody somewhat washes their hands. Now, for us, one of our biggest challenges is visibility over real-time data, particularly when we're talking about more transactional revenue streams. So if we think about forecasting just as a concept, ultimately what we want to be able to do, we want to be able to feed finance a number or a series of numbers, whether that's in month or whether that's more longer term, and we want to be reasonably confident about that number. Now, what we see, or what I've seen in the past, is a panic around month end and a deep dive in the first few days of the month. And a lot of arguments. You said it was going to be X, it was Y. And for me, the root cause of all of that is a lack of real-time data to support that forecasting process. Now, if we could marry the worlds of pricing and the worlds of technology and bring those two together in a consistent manner, consistent is probably the wrong word, and monitor the situation in real time, that's when we can start to make some of those decisions earlier in the process, earlier in the month, earlier in the quarter, to really impact finance and our finance forecasts at a much earlier stage. And I know this isn't something that's alien to many sales operations leaders and revenue operations leaders. But it's not something that I see that often organizations adopting.
The joined up revenue lifecycle, which kind of couples sales with finance early, enough
Absolutely.
in the
In a lot of
transaction
organizations,
lifecycle.
sales and finance are seen as very separate functions.
Right.
But in reality, they're one and the same.
I think that's,
or they can be one and the same. They're not one and the same, but they should be a lot closer. There's no reason why they can't be interconnected, closely interconnected. And I think that the organizations that do go down that approach see the best results. They really do.
Absolutely. Would it be fair to summarize, what you're kind of hinting at by saying, as you pointed out, sales and finance, the same but not the same, and what makes them one, I suppose, these two functions, two very seemingly disparate functions with very different personality traits, nothing in common on the face of it.
Absolutely.
But I think
yes,
what's unifying them, or what's kind of creating the need to unify them, I suppose, is the recurring revenue lifecycle and or the variability, which needs to kind of couple finance with the customer engagement, side of things, which was not the case previously. I mean, if we were selling, I don't know, big machines, for example, for lack of a better, stereotype, we didn't really care about that sales and finance coupling, right? We cared about a sales transaction that eventually showed up as an order in finance, which then essentially hit the general ledger and generated the kind of revenue life cycle, or the revenue schedule rather, based on that. I mean, there's no schedule there. There is a one-time recognition. I mean, you recognize on shipping. I think nowadays it's obviously you recognize mostly on installation when it comes to a hardware piece of device. But that's changed, right? Every company is pivoting to a servitized recurring revenue model, which means every company, well, most companies, are looking to kind of couple finance with sales a lot earlier in the transaction life cycle during the customer engagement, right? I think would it be fair to say that that's kind of, where you're going with this?
Yes, it is. Not necessarily by bringing finance into those discussions, but creating a tech stack that facilitates that.
Right. Giving that context earlier on, I suppose, is what's missing downstream. Back to the point that you made, which is panic around the end of the month, resulting in deep dives in terms of what was supposed to happen versus what has happened. I think that's, to an extent, yes, lack of data, real-time data kind of visibility, but it's also lack of context, right? In terms of what did the rep actually sell, right? I mean, we get this question all the time in over the course of our engagement, right? Is what did the rep sell? I mean, did they sell a consumption product? Did they sell a subscription coupled with a consumption product? And why was it sold at a certain price versus, and there might be good reason for all of the, the transactional elements that the sales rep has, kind of built into the transaction, but finance doesn't know that. And to your point, they don't need to sit in a conversation with the customer, but they need that context to flow through systemically as early as possible so they can prepare for the downstream
Absolutely.
month end panic or lack thereof if they have
Yes.
the
Yeah.
context. Yeah, it's interesting. That's interesting. Any specific examples that you'd like to kind of draw out? I mean, I know we have a few from the conversations we have on a weekly basis almost in terms of pricing a certain way. I mean, maybe for the benefit of our audience, Di, would you like to give a quick summary of the kind of product and how it gets sold, so we have a little bit more context of the type of product?
Absolutely.
It's a currency related product, right? So maybe
It's a
you want to
currency
have,
related product.
yeah,
So as you can
yeah.
imagine, well, it's a multi-currency related product.
Thank you.
Um, we sell a multitude of products, upwards of sort of 50, 60, 70. Um, you can't really call them products for us. They're more ingredients, ingredients for product bundle. Um, and those ingredients can be sold or configured or priced in multiple ways. So we have one-time pricing, we have subscription-based pricing, we have consumption-based pricing, and then that consumption-based pricing can be tiered in multiple ways. So it can be slab tiered, it can be range tiered, and then for our subscription-based products, we can overlay um, a, a, a degree of additional tiering, date tiering, for example. So it's our pricing can get quite complex, and our offerings can get quite complex, and you could have upwards of 30, 40, 50 ingredients um, that forms the basis of a pricing offer with multiple tiering options applied to it. So configuring that can be a challenge, and then passing that information upstream for processing, particularly invoicing, can also be a challenge. So, yeah, we see our fair share of issues day to day. Hence why we're working together.
Thank you for that. That is, I think, very helpful for our listeners because I think, as you mentioned, the concept of ingredients and not products, I think, is a very interesting one here, right? I hope the audience picked up on that because you are selling this service again back to servitizing what you offer. Obviously, if you're a fintech, you're not selling a physical product, you're selling a service essentially. And these ingredients kind of drive the revenue model. And as you mentioned, some have a one-time charge type, some have a recurring billing basis, and rev rec basis, of course, and then the other variable recurring revenue which layers on the subscription. So essentially, you're bringing a bunch of ingredients together to create the perfect service for your end customer, from a B2B kind of selling motion point of view. So that's the configuration step, as you mentioned, is quite complicated. And, I think one of the complications or a couple of the complications we've worked together on are, in terms of, how do you price based on a percentage, right? As simple as that versus on absolute price,
Yes.
basis on the slabs or the tiers that you're referring to. And how some of the technologies at your fingertips, in terms of, without naming the platform, you're on the world's number one CRM platform, but in terms of how do you customize it to your advantage towards making that simple change that will make the sales reps job so much easier, avoid errors downstream. And this is an example of some of the things that we can solve upstream for, right? Is getting that right. I mean, if you're pricing based on a percentage, can the quoting motion reflect that effectively for the sales rep to kind of do it really easily, and get it right 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10 on a good month. But it's just these small things, the way you quote a, volume of transactions. So if you're transacting 1 million in currency, you want that transaction to be rated, based on a percentage tier basis, right? That's obviously one of the problems that kind of we were speaking about. Is that, from your experience, quite common, this type of challenge, which is kind of a simple business ask, but not very easy to kind of deploy technically?
So not so that specific example, not necessarily so. But what I tend to find that in most organizations, there is that type of challenge. So it might not be this example, but very rarely have I worked for an organization in the past, or spoke with peers that work with organizations similar or vastly different in the past, that doesn't have that little bit of niche mixed in to the ingredients. So for us, it is that sort of challenge. It's percentage-based pricing versus fixed value pricing. For other organizations, it could be dual tiering, for example. For another organization, it could be multi-currency tiering. There's always a challenge, I find, somewhere. And having a system that can be adapted to cope with those challenges is so crucial. So crucial. I've also worked for organizations in the past that doesn't have any systems at all and manages all this through spreadsheets, for example. And that's just a nightmare. But yeah, there is always a challenge, and it's always that little niche challenge that requires some sort of customization to overcome the challenges.
That's well, thanks for that. It's an interesting take, and what came to mind while you were speaking was, is this? So I guess there are three kind of paths we can traverse here. One is, it is in fact, how you bend a technical or technology solution to kind of fit the business requirement, and how creative you are in being able to deploy technology to kind of or bend technology to your business needs is kind of one way to look at it. I suppose the other way to look at it is, are we being imaginative enough in terms of how we're structuring the business process, right? Is it really a business requirement? I mean, yes, it's currently an ask from sales, and we get this all the time, right? Virtually every day, I think. This needs to be so, and because we say so. But is it really a burning need to, for example, dual tier, based on date ranges as well as range, slab tiering, or range tiering? So essentially, you're discounting based on certain dates. So what you're telling the customer is, look, for the first 3 months, we'll give this product free of charge. For the next 3 months, we'll give you at a 50% discount, and then we'll kind of ramp down the discount to 25% till you kind of ramp up to your list price, or your reference price for that deal, and then use that as an exit price to renew, right? But at the same time, you have a volume-based discount that you're applying based on the tiers of consumption. So if you're transacting 1 million in currency, it's 0.05% of that transaction. If it's per transaction, if it's million to 10 million, it's obviously a slightly lower clip. So essentially, you're discounting kind of, as the name suggests, dual tiering. So you're dual tiering the discount. You're offering the customer a discount both ways. So is this really a business ask? I mean, I know it's a sales ask, but could we perhaps reimagine some of this, you think? I mean, which is the third part, the happy medium, the middle of the spectrum, where there's a balance between how much you should bend technology, and what you should potentially solve for from a sales transaction point of view, which is aligned with the business objectives, right? I mean, ultimately, you don't want to discount your customer more than you need to. I mean, the volume discount should take care of it ideally, but then you're kind of providing a discount upfront. So is this something? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I see this quite frequently with customers. So where do you kind of sit on that?
So I suppose it all depends on the maturity of the organization. So if we're talking about a large corporate, well-established, 20, 25, 30,000 plus employee organization, you're probably not going to go down that customization route. You're probably going to have rate cards and default pricing. And as a seller, you're more than likely going to be limited in terms of how you can configure that pricing offer. But then, if you're talking about an organization that's looking to secure early round funding or mid round funding, that is particularly in today's age, finding that the markets are challenging, then you're going to want to configure your offering in a more customized way to win business. So it really depends on the maturity of the organization. And I think that when you talk about offering flexibility, there are pros and cons in both scenarios. So the pros and cons that are applicable to that organization that is trying to ramp up, that is trying to grow, that is potentially looking for investor funding, yada yada yada, is going to want the tools at hand to grow that business. And that is going to look very differently to the organization that's well established and mature, that has 50,000 employees, yada, yada, yada. So for me, it does really depend on the maturity of the organization.
But are we saying that that flexibility is a competitive differentiator? I mean, do the investors, again, going back to the fintech context here, I mean, we're obviously all about growth, but now in this day and age of, high cost of finance and inflationary kind of trends, we are also looking at, operating margin as well, not just, growth at all costs anymore, right? That notion has kind of evolved quite a bit since, over the last couple of years. And I won't even get into the political kind of climate in the United Kingdom at this point in time, but we leave that for a very separate discussion. But my question to you is, I mean, does the venture capital or the private equity organization care about, how you offer that flexibility? In fact, I would think they potentially want less of a discounting lever, or I mean, in a way that kind of protects the company's margins versus yes, from a sales flexibility point of view, I guess you can acquire the customer a lot more quickly. But I guess the question I'm asking is that the kind of customer you want to acquire that requires dual tiered, discounting for them to come on board? And is that the kind of customer that gives you the kind of lifetime value that you're looking for that makes, your investors happy, I suppose? I mean, I know there's a lot in there that I kind of packed in. So that's,
Yep.
again, it's probably a deeper discussion. But fundamentally, what I'm saying is, are we having the right impact? Yes, we want to acquire customers, but B, do we want to acquire a certain kind of customer that does not require that level of, hand-holding from day one and or discounting in the form of discounting? C, is there a way to kind of provide that discount with less administrative overhead downstream? Because I mean, you and I are not new to this situation where you have finance completely clueless in terms of what is happening from a discounting standpoint across these different tiers and being able to reconcile that downstream. I mean, regardless of whether you have a billing system or not, right? I mean, you have sales, the CRM, you have CPQ, you have ERP at the back end. And obviously now with the recurring revenue transaction, you have some kind of a billing system, whether that's homegrown, whether that's manual spreadsheets, whether that's a billing system. That it creates a lot of overheads downstream in terms of how you reconcile that. So is it worth it to acquire these customers at all costs, literally, to the organization? Or is there a way to say, look, we push back on some, we don't have this kind of discounting. Yes, we provide the discount, maybe using one lever, and maybe the absolute value of the discount doesn't change. Maybe it's a little less, but maybe, overall it's the same. But then the administrative overhead decreases. It's more predictable in terms of how you acquire these customers, and you're very clear about who your ICP is, your ideal client profile is in that scenario. So that is how much of that thinking do you think goes into a sales operations discussion in an engine room when you hit that panic button at the end of the month? Does this discussion go completely out of the window, or do you think that some of this kind of percolates through your discussions?
It depends on the organization. It really
Right.
does.
Right.
So it should go on, and it does go on for us. But again, it depends on who you've got around that table, who you've got in that engine room. In an ideal world, absolutely, we should be looking at the value of the proposition and whether it is actually a proposition that is long-term valuable to the organization, or are we simply just trying to get that short win, that quick fire win? And we probably should, in some scenarios, turn around and say, do you know what, this is just a quick fire win. This is just going to be really bad for us in the long term. It's going to cost more to service this offering. But anyway,
Yeah,
coming
it's
back
striking
to
that right balance is what you're saying, and
finding
that
the right
depends
balance.
on maturity. Is
But again,
what
it
it comes
comes
down to.
absolutely.
And the solution or product being sold, again, depending on the ingredients that kind of create the solution. I mean, there's obviously nuance there. There's no, I mean, but I think that's the conversation. I mean, either you're having the conversation or you're not, I guess, is the question. I mean,
And I
yes,
think,
yeah,
and I think most organizations will have that conversation at the right time.
right.
But again, it comes down to maturity, because an organization 3, 4, 5 years old that's in Series A, Series B funding round is going to operate very differently to the organization that's in the Series E, Series F funding round, and is going to need a completely different set of tools to get to Series E, Series F. And I think that part of that toolkit is the ability to be far more flexible in your offering than you necessarily need or probably should need to be.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. Just this has been a really good discussion, and I think Di, we need to pick this up when you're here in person at the
Absolutely.
White Frame Studio.
Yes.
So we can kind of build on some of these very exciting topics, exciting to us. We hope exciting to our audience as well.
I'm sure.
I'm sure it is. And in terms of kind of setting the stage for future discussions, I mean, what would be, and here's a question I think I want to ask all my guests at some point is, what's the one thing that you do, given what you know now, having done this, revenue operations leadership role, played this role, for a while now, maybe pick something specific. And what is the one thing that you do from a pricing perspective in terms of how you sell your products, the pricing model that you think would have disproportionately high impact on finance, to a point where they'll, show up at your doorsteps and thank you for it, and
Yeah.
cry, or something emotional to that effect. Yes. What would that be in your mind? Something for our viewers to kind of take away from this discussion.
So for me, it would just be the super custom offering. So again, we've spent a lot of time here talking about maturity of organization and how customizable we should make some of our offerings. I've seen some wacky offerings in the past, and I think to myself, finance are going to hate us for this. And whilst it's a profitable offering, it's a lot of manual work. And I think, do you know what? We are just shooting ourselves in the foot here. We are going to run into issues. We are going to, at some point, be reversing out revenue due to the complexity and the issues that we are causing ourselves. And like you said, at some point, finance are going to be on my door crying or throwing fists. So yes, that would be my response.
Fantastic, and that really fits in with where we started this off, in terms of pre-rev and precognition when it comes to revenue recognition and the minority report, if you will. I suppose there are minority reports when you come up with a custom offering.
Yes.
That
Yes.
you need to traverse through at a sales transaction level in order to inform finance early, which makes life complicated for everyone. Back to that emotional engagement or that emotional moment with finance that you're hinting at. But on a positive note, I think this has been very useful. I think this has been very, it's been a great discussion. And I think there is a lot here that we can build on, Di, as we,
Absolutely.
have more of these conversations moving forward.
Sounds
And,
good.
thanks to you, and really appreciate you making time. And
No, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
really,
Look forward
really
to the next
appreciate
one.
that. Look forward to it. I look forward to it as well. And thanks to our viewers.